Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Halfway through the week. All right. Most of you have turned in your DNA profiling gizmo. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, something's going on, and my computer's so slow too, till it's become annoying. I hope it's not a sign that I need a new one, but I fully understand a slow moving computer for sure. Alrighty. Getting everybody logged in. All right, so we're going to look at this last video from our trendy science teacher, and it's kind of reviewing what you've done in the lab. And then we're going to look at a short video on what is CODIS. And then on Friday, we will wrap up this unit. So we'll go through all the summary and wrap it up so that we can test it next week, Tuesday, for you all. All right, so again, the objective is to finish the unit Friday, test it on Thursday, and Wednesday I have is Earth Day. So I have a Earth Day whodunit for you to work on. It's going to take us a minute, but like all our activities, but it's a whodunit. And at the end, we'll kind of do a poll to see who everybody thought was the culprit. All right, so I'm just kind of waiting for everyone to get in. I'll give it another minute. Just a reminder too that with the gizmo, you need to make sure you go back and do the quiz. You also want to make sure that you get caught up on any outstanding assignments because progress reports are coming out next week, Tuesday to be exact. So, and it just automatically shows whatever's in Canvas. So make sure that it's showing your very best and not showing any missing assignments. All right, because it's Wednesday and it's short, I'm gonna go ahead and get started so that we don't run out of time to do what I want to do. Learn how to make that thing go away.
All right, welcome back to our second lesson over DNA profiling. If you haven't already watched the first lesson, make sure that you go back and do that because it's a review of DNA in general, where it's located in the cell and how it's used in forensics. So definitely watch that video if you have not already watched it, and then come back to this one where we start to talk about how DNA can be collected as evidence and then turned into something useful to forensic investigators. So DNA profiling is the most important discovery in forensics to date. Now, why do I say that? Well, because DNA profiling is the actual process of determining an individual's characteristics. And we know that DNA, except for identical twins, DNA is unique to each person. So it all started with Alec Jeffreys back in 1984, and he was in his lab working on X-ray and DNA. And what he found was that he could tell a lot about a person just by looking at their genetic profile or their DNA fingerprint. So you can see 1984 is when Alec Jeffreys developed the process of DNA fingerprinting or DNA profiling. And then very shortly after, just 3 years later, the first conviction, what happened based on DNA evidence. And so we've been using it ever since. It is a fairly new technology with regards to time as a whole. It's a fairly new technology, but has been quite instrumental in forensics. So to make it understandable, you need to know that in humans, we have long linear strands of DNA, but within that, we have something called genes. So it is true that 99% of our DNA is going to be exactly the same as every other human on the planet. However, there are segments within our DNA that are unique to us, and these segments are called short tandem repeats, or STRs. And scientists have discovered that there is quite a bit of variability within these STRs. So they are basically letters of DNA that repeat STRs. So they are basically letters of DNA that repeat over and over and
All right, I
over.
wanted to pause it there because that's one of the things vocabulary that you need to be aware of: short tandem repeats. So, and it's in Canvas, so just be aware that that's a vocabulary word that you will be tested on.
And these STRs differ from person to person. So if they're extracted from the rest of the DNA, then they can generate a profile that's unique to that person. And we call this a DNA profile or a DNA fingerprint. And that's exactly what you're looking at on the screen. So in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, this is a genetic profile or a DNA profile. And then investigators can use that to match crime scene evidence to different suspects. So it is quite a complicated process. I'm going to use this image to kind of walk you through the process because I think it's easier to understand if you're looking at a picture. So basically what we're looking at in this picture is a process known as gel electrophoresis.
All right, so if you've done your lab, this should look familiar to you.
And gel electrophoresis is used by investigators to create a genetic profile or a DNA profile. But it's a little more complicated than just creating a genetic profile because the DNA has to first be collected and then it has to go through some different steps before gel electrophoresis comes into play. So if you'll look at number 1 in the picture, this represents DNA and it's collected. It can be collected from a crime scene. It can be collected from a person who wants to understand parentage. Maybe if somebody's their father or somebody's their mother or somebody's a sibling. It could be collected from somebody that just wants to understand certain predispositions to different genetic diseases like cancers or Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of different applications to DNA profiling, but number 1 just represents the DNA itself. So after the DNA is collected, restriction enzymes are going to be added because they're going to cut the DNA into fragments. And that's important because that's where we separate the STRs. Remember, that's what's unique to each individual person from the rest of the DNA, which is not unique. So once extracted, we have what's called variability. So then we're able to move on to the next step. So if you'll look at step 3, after we have used those restriction enzymes to cut the DNA and secure the STRs, we can then amplify those STRs by using something called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR for short. And then if you'll look in step 4, we can then separate those STRs by putting them through the process of gel electrophoresis. So the DNA is placed in wells, and if you'll look at picture 5, you can see those gray rectangles represent wells. So the DNA is placed in those wells within an agarose gel, And then electricity is going to be used to pull those fragments of DNA to generate what we call a profile, a genetic profile or a DNA profile. So the difference between step 5 and step 6 is a stain has been used to just sort of make those markers pop so that we can print it out and then compare. So that whole process is called gel electrophoresis. Now you might think, how is that applicable? Well, it's applicable because it helps us in forensics to match evidence found at a crime scene to maybe suspects or maybe to a victim, or it can exclude a victim to being the donor of DNA found at a crime scene. So it can help in forensics. It can also help us determine family relationships. I mentioned that earlier. It can also help in healthcare. So I also mentioned that earlier. It can help us understand if we are likely to have Alzheimer's or breast cancer. So when lab techs do DNA profiling, they generally use about 13 different sections of DNA, and those sections are going to be highly variable. So it's a good way to ensure that we have accurate matches. However, for these pictures that you're going to see in the next couple of slides, you're not going to see 13 different sections of DNA. So you're only going to see a couple. And that just makes it easier to read these DNA profiles starting off. But just know that in real life, it's a little more complicated than this. There are going to be many more different sections of DNA that investigators have to look at. So one application to DNA profiling, of course, is with forensics. So you can see an example of that here. So we have DNA that's collected from a victim. We also have DNA that's collected as evidence from the crime scene. And then it looks like we have 3 different suspects. So what we can do is we can match the markers of the evidence DNA to the victim. And what I can see here is the victim is not the donor of this crime scene DNA, which is helpful to investigators because if they can figure out who is the donor, then they have what's called a lead and they can follow up on that lead. So it looks like according to this DNA profile, suspect 1 is going to be a person of interest for us. Here's an example of how family relationships can use genetic profiling or DNA profiling. So you see we have a child here, and if I am trying to exclude one of these 2 men as the father of that child, I can use this DNA profile. Remember, 50% of a child's markers are going to match mom, 50% are going to match dad, which is helpful as we're moving through. So you can see this marker here, this first one matches mom. And the second one does not match mom, which means it must match the father of this child. So because alleged father 1 has the marker that matches, we're going to assume that he is the father of the child. Now, there are some common concerns in forensics using DNA profiling. It is a huge part of forensics, but a couple of things. First of all, the quality of the sample has to be a good quality sample. So that is very important when investigators are working a crime scene that they collect good quality samples of DNA. Of course, with a person or any time you have humans involved with interpretation or collection of evidence, there are different mistakes and inaccuracies. Also, DNA profiling is not a fast or cheap method of crime scene evidence analysis, and so sometimes the labs are backed up. Sometimes you have to wait a long time for DNA profiles to be developed, and they are very expensive. All right, if you want further explanation about DNA profiling, if you will search YouTube for Amoeba Sisters gel electrophoresis, they go into a lot more detail than we did in this lesson. It's a really good way to understand the entire process, and the graphics and images are really good too. So if you just need some more information, you can check out that video.
So again, that one was a review of what basically what you did in your gizmo. So what is electrophoresis? How is it used in DNA processing? And how does it help with forensics? Those are the questions you need to ask as far as that is concerned. One of the things that it's used for is to store it in a database. And that database is called
How is
CODIS.
CODIS
So you need to know what CODIS is.
used? Imagine a world where solving crimes could be as simple as matching a fingerprint or a DNA sample to a database. This is where the Combined DNA Index System, commonly known as CODIS, comes into play. It is a powerful tool utilized by law enforcement agencies across the United States to help identify suspects and solve criminal cases. CODIS operates by storing DNA profiles collected from crime scenes, convicted offenders, and missing persons. When a DNA sample is obtained from a crime scene, it is analyzed and converted into a unique DNA profile. This profile is then compared against the profiles stored in the CODIS database. If a match is found, it can provide critical information that may lead to the identification of a suspect or the resolution of a case. The system is divided into three main databases: the National DNA Index System, which contains profiles from convicted offenders and arrestees; the Forensic Index, which includes DNA profiles from crime scene evidence; and the Missing Persons Index, which holds profiles of individuals who are missing. This organization allows law enforcement to efficiently search for matches and connect cases that may have previously seemed unrelated. In addition to aiding in criminal investigations, CODIS also plays a role in exonerating individuals wrongfully convicted of crimes. By comparing DNA evidence from a case with profiles in the database, law enforcement can confirm or refute a suspect's involvement in a crime, which can lead to the releases of innocent individuals. The use of CODIS is not limited to just one jurisdiction. The system allows for collaboration between local, state, and federal agencies, creating a network of information that enhances the ability to solve crimes across different regions. This interconnectedness is vital in cases where a suspect may have committed crimes in multiple locations. In summary, CODIS serves as a critical resource in the fight against crime, providing law enforcement with the tools necessary to identify suspects, solve cases, and ensure justice is served. Through the careful collection and analysis of DNA profiles, CODIS continues to make a significant impact on criminal investigations nationwide.
Okay. All right. So in the time that's left, do we have any time? We got a few minutes left. Make sure that you have turned in your DNA profiling gizmo. And if you've done that already, go ahead and finish up reading the rest of the module, because like I said, we're going to do a wrap-up discussion on Friday. And oops, where are we going? Mm-mm-mm. All right. So there's more information about CODIS, some more acronyms.
Scribe makes step-by-step guides for any process with...
Make that go away. Alrighty. So again, we got a few minutes left. Make sure you've turned in your profile DNA gizmo. Read up some more information about how CODIS is used in Canvas. for forensic profile, for convicting offender profile, the arrestee profile, missing persons profile, unidentified human remains profile, and biological relative DNA, which is kind of what everybody's used to these days. They don't think about forensics, but everybody's trying to do ancestry.com to find out who they're related to, where they came from. But for the purposes of this class, we need to be focused on how is it used to solve crimes. And then the wrap up. All right, so I have some review questions for you to talk about on Friday. Let me quickly do attendance. I haven't done attendance yet. All right, so don't go nowhere. If you're a senior, make sure that you are aware that you have to attend the senior meeting. It's mandatory if you're going to walk with LVA. So make sure that you make yourself available to that. And again, a reminder, because I did look at some folks' worksheets yesterday and you did not do the quiz. So make sure that you've done, because it's 5 points of your grade if you omit the quiz at the end of the activity.
I saw that my PR got approved, but there was a test failure. And like, years. And heck,
Right, I'm looking at the Gizmo quiz, and more than half of you have not done it. Please make sure that you get it done before next week. If you are in a good place to stop, you may go ahead and do so. Time is just about up. And I will see you guys on Friday. Have a great one.